Welcome to Talking True, where I have the wonderful opportunity to speak to near-death experiencers, mystics, authors, people who've had spiritual awakenings, and healers. And joining me today is a friend that I met, I can't even remember when, 15 or 20 years ago now, long time. So I'm absolutely delighted she's joining me today. Her name is Jude Berman. She's an editor and a writer, and she's soon to be launching her brand new book, which is titled The Die. So Jude, thank you for joining me. I'm so excited that you're here today. It's great to have you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
It's more like 25 years, but yes.
Oh, is it? Oh my gosh.
20, yeah, no, it is, yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Time flies.
Yes. So, what's been really nice is guests have been sharing their shifts of consciousness, awakenings, or whatever you want to call it, with respect to them finding the courage to express their gifts, their innate gifts, whether it's writing, singing, or whatever it is. So would you like to give some kind of details about how that happened for you?
With respect to, well, it wouldn't be actually this book, because I've only worked on this book in the last set of years. But if we go back in time more like 20 years,
Yeah.
when I had been spending a lot of time in my life in a spiritual community, and the message there was very strongly that service was the vehicle, and anything other than service to outside of yourself, to a teacher, to a community, was considered selfish, something that was discouraged. And I was really committed to that path and to service as the highest aim in my life. And when I left that community, I questioned a lot of things. And that was one of the things I questioned. I questioned, like, what am I going to do now? Because I had, I was like in college, I was an art major, and I had done writing, and I had actually written another book at one point that went nowhere. It wasn't finished. So I had all of that creative stuff sort of simmering. But then I had this really strong dictate to that this was not the highest way to go. And so I held back on doing that. And then I started talking with other people who were in a similar situation, really, and discovered they had a similar block. And so through that discussion and through just reassessing everything, started opening doors, and I started writing. And that would have been, like I said, well, at this point, 21 years ago. And at that point, I pulled up a book that I had written before that is actually now going to be published, not the Die, but another one. So it just, in sum, it was this tension between, is being creative a selfish act, not the highest act? What is the highest act to, a highest way to live one's life if you are a spiritual person?
Yeah, I really love that because, and there's so many parallels with respect to what you've just shared and what I was taught in the Catholic tradition growing up, because it was essentially, if you do anything for yourself, you're being selfish, especially as a woman. So it was really easy for me to buy into that idea that I shouldn't be thinking about myself with respect to my creative outlet or output or whatever. And so there was a lot of kind of obstacles in the beginning phases around that. And the other part of that was the voice that said, who do you think you are?
Yes, yes.
Even thinking that you could write a book or that you could create artwork that could sell. And I think what you've described is fairly common. It's especially for women, it's really, it can be really deeply entrenched that it's a selfish act if you try and do anything for yourself with respect to creativity. So how did you kind of face that down? What did you do?
Well, I think there were, there were sort of phases of it. I mean, the first and basic one was just to start writing and to say,
Mhm.
I'm going to do this. It's even if this little voice in the back of my mind is saying, you shouldn't do this, is selfish. I'm just going to do it anyway because I have to. And it's just calling me to do it. And I've always been somebody who felt like I had something to say, or that something would come through me, might be the better way to put it, that should be said.
Mhm.
And everything that I've written feels like that, and so I think it's the kind of thing where the voice would, I would hear it and I would act, and then I would sort of hear it, and it would sort of fade, and then I'd hear it again. And I think I'm probably hearing it more now than I have in a while, just because I'm facing, now it's being published, and that's sort of the next step of daring to put the voice
Yes.
up into the world. It's one thing to just say, okay, I'm going to have a writing practice, and I'm going to
Mhm.
write every day or every other, I don't write probably every day, but on a regular basis. And
Mhm.
keep doing it. And then now this sense of, oh, I'm putting it out into the world.
Yeah, because that's a whole other thing as well, isn't it? A big part of it is the revelation part, being seen, having the courage to stand behind your work, to
Mhm.
reveal your wisdom, especially if you're sharing deep spiritual truths or anything that relates to your own path or your journey or your awakening or whatever you want to call that. It can be scary. And again, I think we're kind of imprinted, especially as women, to try and protect ourselves. And you could say it's from another lifetime or whatever, but I think there is that fear ingrained within us about trying to stay safe.
Yeah, and I mean, in a professional sense, I encountered that kind of stuff as when I worked in an academic setting and all that, that I'm sure that comes back into my mind as well, that, your voice as a woman. I was not the lead author because only the male, whatever professor could do it at the time. So yes, there's a whole cultural thing. And I think it's somehow, though, more almost insidious when it comes from a spiritual community, because you place a really deep trust in that process. And so for me, it's been a lot about just going deeper into myself and not looking at as much at all from what messages are coming from the outside, but just saying, okay, just
Yes.
it's like being the container for that.
Yes, yes. I do have to say too, since we're on this subject, that I counsel through the intuitive work that I do and so on. I counseled a lot of people likely in the same spiritual community that were afraid to step out. They were afraid to stand behind their gifts. They didn't feel that they could find their voice. There was a lot of self-doubt. It was just this great big kind of ball of anxiety around that because of what you shared earlier, in terms of it being selfish, and you
Yeah.
should really be serving the teacher or the guru or whoever it is, in terms of who's the head of that lineage. So it can become very difficult to break free from that, I think, because
Yeah.
the drive can be huge, from that belief, that limiting belief.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I literally know some people who died before they were able to, who were in that process of reclaiming their voice, but died before they were able to do that, which is, a sad thing. And I think that's part of what's driving me now, because I'm no young chicken, and, it's like now or never. And a little bit feeling like I'm making up for lost time in doing this. Some people was like, somebody said to me the other day, like, what, you have 3 books, And I said, yeah, look at my age, if I don't do it now, I'm not going to do it. And you can't go and regret that you didn't do it earlier, because you only have the present moment anyway. So I'm,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And the other part of that too. I mean, I remember some years ago when I probably went in when I was writing my first book, thinking, if I don't do it now, what am I going to do? Wait until I'm 90 on my deathbed, so let me finally publish.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's true for everybody. It doesn't matter how young or how old you are. It's really about finding the courage to stand behind what is authentic and true and real for you, and sharing it. You know, if you feel it has value and you want to share it, then I would say go for it. Get help too, in terms of, you know, if you need editing help or cover
Yeah.
design help or whatever you need help with, or marketing, which is a whole other story.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, with, you know, my professional hat, not the author hat, that is what I have spent a lot of time doing, which is working with authors and getting them, not necessarily fiction. Most of them are probably nonfiction, but it's still the same process and the same, you know, having the gumption to go ahead and write it and just be able to do that. And then at one point it was like, well, I'm helping all these other authors, you know, and I love doing that. But
Yes.
what about what I have, you know, what's coming through me?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it has screamed at me for a long time, I have to say, even if
Yeah.
I wasn't listening. The
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to get into
Yeah.
this. The
Yeah.
die, you know, that started screaming to me at that same time, in around, well, 20 years, 2003, basically. So a little more than 20 years ago. And I had this sense that I wanted, it wasn't even a me wanting it, like it was really a download sort of situation where there was this notion that the stories from the Mahabharata, which I had spent decades, you know, being familiar with and studying and hearing about and whatnot. And I thought, well, they're known in spiritual circles, but there is wisdom there that everybody and anybody, you know, like the modern world, the people around us could benefit from. And so
Mm-hmm.
the seed idea was to take those stories and put them into short stories that were set in the present, or actually they would be set in the future, you know, and so create these stories that would speak to people now. And you know, I got like this far into it, but I couldn't get there with it. And so it was like, oh, I have this, you know, great ideas coming through, but I don't know how, you know, and I moved on to writing other stuff. And it was only right at the 2016 election, November 2016, when all of that came down, and I was on an airplane and I was actually going to Hawaii because I had planned a great celebration after, you know, because I had worked on the election and needed a break after intense work on it. And then I had this thought as this landing, the plane was landing, and I thought that, oh, Hillary is in exile. And then immediately I thought, exile? That's the Mahabharata. That's the, you know, like the key plot line in the Mahabharata. They go into exile, and the whole book then just downloaded within a few days. Basically, I didn't write it all, but the whole thing was there, and it was not short stories, but it was this parallel of these three realities, and the reality I had been missing. I had the ancient one, the wisdom, and I had the future story. I had missing the, you know, our current reality.
Wow. Wow, you couldn't even make that up.
Yeah.
So, so you set to straight away, pretty much after that insight?
Immediately. I mean, literally immediately. Like I said, it literally was like, oh, you had those little pieces, you know, what at that point it was whatever, 12 years before or something. But here's what, you know, it's like, here's the whole thing. And it was
Wow.
just all there. And then it was just a question of, you know, living through the writing of it and having the different, tell the story through four characters as narrators. And it was just spending the time with the four of them.
Wow.
And there,
What
you know, I did go through editing process, and there was a whole thing about publishing, and you know, it took a few years till now to get to, but that's sort of the second chapter of a story. But this was how the creative process worked once I was really sitting there and open to it and not listening to the voice that said, well, you know, that's selfish. It was not about being selfish.
Yeah. Yes, yes. It's in a way, it's actually the reverse. It's selfish not to share if you feel like you have something of value, right? But all of this can become so distorted, or we can be confused about what we're hearing, or whatever the story is, and it's really amazing. So I have an interesting question. Since your kind of profession is to edit, to help other authors and so on, how did you get on with editing your own book? Did you turn to somebody else, or did you trust your own editing?
Yeah, I trusted my own. Because I mean, it's not like I'm just have a few years of editing
Yeah,
experience.
yeah,
I
yeah.
started editing in the 80s, so I really feel, you know, comfortable with that. And my publisher actually was okay with that. They do proofreading, so there was that level, and they brought somebody in for that. And I had a sensitivity reader, which is different from an editor. Um,
Hmm. Do you want to explain what that is? Because I'm not even sure myself. What is that?
Yeah, yeah, it's become it's a it's a diversity, equity, inclusion,
Oh,
and I do work in that field, so I know it from that as well because I actually do sensitivity reads or have done them on nonfiction books. But the idea is that somebody with an eye to call anything that's culturally different from the author, somebody comes in and just gives it a second eye to see, is there something here that, could rub people the wrong way? And in my case, I have all, I took the five Pandavas were not, this I knew way back in 2003, the five Pandavas in the future were not going to be five princes. They were going to be men and women and so on. And so I made them really diverse. So there's a bicultural Jewish man, and there's a Muslim woman who's Afghani American, and there's a Asian American woman, and there's a gay couple. And so and there's an Indian guy, obviously I won't say obviously, but because I don't want to give it away, but yeah, so the person who read it to see have I represented people in a way that it, does no harm to anybody.
mhm.
And
Wow.
I really recommend people do that. I mean, because the alternative is you don't write books about that, if you're white, then you only write about white people. And that's, not that's recreating the world that that we don't want to recreate.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that though. That's really
Yeah.
great. Excellent. And so what did you do about cover design? How did you
Well,
figure that? Because you're artistic, you've got some fantastic artwork. Oh my golly, I love your art.
thank you. Yeah. Well, and I have actually done covers for clients, but I'm not a professional at it. So that's the whole part of the story about how I got published. I can't answer the question about the cover
Um,
without that, which
mhm.
is that I initially I wanted to get a traditional publisher. I thought if it's good enough, then I'll get a traditional publisher. Or I guess I wanted an agent to get the publisher. And I had had a whole history of kind of near misses with that.
Mhm.
One time where I had an agent in New York, and then she, with 9/11 happened, and she like quit the business because you don't need any more books now of fiction. So and never, and I also had a small publishing company, a spiritual
Oh,
um, cooperative indie press, I guess you could call it, in the 90s. So I had that experience, all of which was to say I did not want to self-publish because I
yes.
knew what would go into that. So I kept at this idea of I would get an agent and a traditional publisher, and it wasn't working. And I, at one point, not that long ago, about 2 years ago, when I was shopping, actually these two books, had shopped both of them and getting nowhere, I realized that the reasons that the books weren't going to, get out there were reasons that I couldn't change. I didn't have a large platform. I didn't have, 20,000 social media followers. I wasn't young enough. I wasn't under 40. I mean, there were all these things that I couldn't really change. And
Hmm.
so I actually put the whole thing in the drawer and said to a friend, it's not going to work because I'm not going to get younger. I'm not going to get these followers and, all of these things that I know they're looking for. And and I said, oh, but I do know this one other option, and it's hybrid publishing. And I knew there's well, it's called She Writes Press and Spark Press. It's a umbrella of the same organization, and they're started in Berkeley where I am. And so okay, I'm going to give it one last try. And that's what I've gone with. And I've been so pleased with really all aspects of that. And they do the cover design.
Oh,
And
wow.
excellent covers, and not just mine. I'm happy with, I mean, when I see other people's covers, that they're really good as well. And the cover, they've already done the cover for the second book, and I'm really pleased with that as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because getting that right is not easy.
Right. And so that's the beauty of this hybrid model. And there's also hybrid publishers out there that are just cons. So this is not a blanket. You have to, you have to be discriminating on which ones. But yeah, that they really can bring the highest professional quality. And you as an author are paying, that it not, I mean, there is that privilege. You have to have the money to be able to do it. But you also have to do that if you're going to self-publish. You have to pay for that. So
yes. So do you mind sharing the name of the publishing company again? Because
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so She Writes Press is the name of the company, but it has several arms, and one arm is Spark Press. So this book is actually coming out through Spark Press. The other two are coming out through She Writes. And the difference is She Writes, they only publish women's books, but Spark, which is actually smaller, publishes men and women.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, you could put a link if you want there. Yes. I really, really recommend that for authors who are serious about it. And the other wonderful thing about it is that's completely different from traditional and indie publishing is they really create a community of authors. So authors are supporting authors, whereas in traditional publishing, another author is like your enemy, your competition.
Yes.
And here it's really all about this huge amount of support.
Yeah. Well, that's really great to know, because I've been involved with a few writers groups on Facebook and different places. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of kind of complaints that for would-be authors, because they've paid substantial amounts of money to these hybrid publishers and either been ripped off or got nowhere or got no help, or the result is not what they wanted. So it's really great to have a recommended place to go for people who don't want to self-publish. So that's really great.
And I know it's it is definitely true. It's a problem with the full spectrum of hybrid there are other good ones. That's not the only one, but there's plenty of bad actors, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's always like that. So you're in the middle of wrapping things up for your first book and getting ready for the launch. Is that what's happening now?
Well, that's what's happening, and I'm writing the third book.
Gosh.
So
So there's nothing stopping you now. You're going full tilt, right?
I'm going full tilt with the awareness that who knows what, it's got its own life. I think it's sort of what you have with, I wasn't a parent, but I think that's what parents have to do, right? You love your child, and what your child makes for themselves is ultimately your child. And I think it's a bit the same with the books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really great. And so you're going through, for these next two, you're going through She Publishes. That's what you said.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so they give you all kinds of support and advice in terms of marketing, or are you on your own?
In that respect, you're like an self-published author. You have to, I mean, that you get distribution. So for example, She Writes Press starting in this, they have a distribution now, but starting in the summer, it's going to be distributed by Simon Schuster. So, that's a lot of muscle in the publishing world. And that's because Simon Schuster has figured out, not that they have their own separate distribution arm that's different from their publishing arm, but that's because they figured out that this new world of publishing, is where it's headed, as you would say. That's the future of publishing. And so they want to be part of that and figure out how to get these books out that are coming through not con artists, but through reputable, hybrid publishers. Yeah.
Yeah. And what
But you
about
do
your,
have to get your own publicist, is what I was going to say. And I
oh,
found publicist, yeah, the same way that you would if you were an indie author.
oh, I see. Yeah. So, and
Or not get
about,
a or you could do not, you have a choice.
right, right. So with a publicist, they would help you with getting the word out, all the marketing, all of those things, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That kind of helps instead of trying to be a one-woman show and do it all yourself, right?
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, it's certainly an interesting experience to say, okay, I mean, it's a good detachment thing, right? Here is
Hmm.
my book, and
Yeah.
tell me what to do with it and how to present. It's helping just get out and do that part that's hard to do as an author who would rather just sort of, or not rather, but just naturally, sit there and write more stories as opposed to get out in the world and talk about your book and
Yeah.
um,
Yes.
do all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And what about your art? Are you still doing your art? Because you had a blog at one time, didn't you? I
I
think.
have the blog. It's still there.
Oh,
Somebody asked me about that because I was posting, I still am posting, but in the last couple of years, I've posted less often. And it's an interesting thing that I found that when I'm working and editing for other people, I have no, problem shifting over and doing the artwork, painting, basically. But
mhm.
when I'm putting enormous amounts of time into my own writing, it is harder to also do that. Not impossible, but there I wouldn't call it competition, but in a sense it is. It's a competition of just sheer energy resources. Um, so I'm having to make a conscious effort to say no, because I don't want to let that go. That's it, I mean, that's a whole other conversation, really, in the sense of that what is created through words and what is created through images is really different for me.
Yes. Yes. It's the same for me as well. So,
Mhm.
in terms of your artwork, what happens? Do you just sit down and intuitively begin to work, or do you see the image and then go from there?
Definitely not the second. I start with nothing preconceived. I simply put paint, sometimes salt as well, but paint or medium, I just put it down and then I come back and I look and I see what's here. And then I sort of pull out what I see is there. And it's like it's just essentially a meditation, really. There, that it's an open-eyed meditation. It's not, there's nothing. I mean, even the recognition of what's there is not analytical. It's just a perception.
Mhm.
And I think I mean, the writing and the words and the books feel like a message coming through. Like this is what needs to be said. Like this is this is the aspects of the wisdom in the Mahabharata that needs a voice now in the world. But the art doesn't have that level of message in that sense. It's much more, yeah, nonverbal, obviously. I mean, but in the full sense of the word nonverbal. Um, Anybody can read anything into it, but it doesn't tie those connections explicitly. I have, though, I don't know if you looked at that. I used to use Rumi quotes with my
Yes.
paintings. And I'd actually I did a show. This was, oh gosh, in the 90s. I did a show and I got permission from the publisher of Rumi at the time, Threshold Books, to use. It was like I wrote them, this is before email, I think, or maybe early email, and they gave me permission. So I was always using these Rumi quotes. And then I just had this clear, message relatively recently that no, you've got to let go of Rumi. He's wonderful. And like it needs to be your own words, whatever's coming through you. So I've shifted to that.
Yeah.
And I always do put words. And
Yes.
that is an sort of an exercise. I stop sometimes I hear the words as I'm painting, but if not, I just have to stop at the end and say, okay, speak, speak,
Yes. Yes. I
kind of
mean,
words.
yeah, I love that because I do the same thing, and I went through a phase where I was teaching intuitive painting courses or workshops. And it was a similar idea. We would pour paint onto a canvas or on paper, or sometimes add alcohol or salt or whatever, or sometimes squish it around with a palette knife and just see how it dried, and then what kinds of images were coming through from the mark making and some of the patterns and the way the paint had come together. So, and it's just the most wonderful thing because it kind of bypasses the critical faculties, and you can just kind of play with what is revealing itself. And
that's interesting. I didn't know you did that, but it's interesting, especially because I haven't met people who've done that. And I actually did, oh, this was quite a few years ago now, maybe 15 years ago, started teaching. And actually somebody even asked me recently to, like, can you tell me how you do this? But for the most part, I've just always felt like, nobody else does this, because we were like, what?
yeah.
But I didn't want to go out and market myself to do all of what it would take to find people who might want to learn it. So I haven't done that.
But from what I've seen of your artwork, the thing that I keep thinking when I see it is, wow, these would make fantastic illustrations for a poetry book or for a storybook or something like that, because they're so unique. I've never seen anything like your artwork before. It's just so utterly unique. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I have a friend who's been a champion for a long time, and she has always repeatedly over years said, I see this book, and but realistically, I mean, I can't illustrate other things because I couldn't, if you say illustrate this,
Yes.
that you have to have that kind of planning, and I don't think I have that skill at all. But I mean, to create an art book is very expensive.
Oh, is it? Mm.
Well, yes, because you have to have all this different quality paper and all of that.
Yes. So, yeah. So even if you self-published it, it would, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who would buy it? I mean, you'd have to, I don't know what the exact price is, but you're talking about $100. That's off the top. I don't know what the actual price is, but it's not your, $17.99 book.
Yeah. So it's different, but I guess the main thing is you're having fun with it, and I'm sure it's revealing insights and messages to you as you're doing it, right? It's usually the way it works.
Yeah. And although, I mean, it's like meditation. You don't have to get a message in order to meditate, right? You just,
Yes.
you meditate for the sake of meditation. And sometimes you get a message and plenty of times you don't. And I think this is a similar kind of thing. It's a way to feed the soul that just wants to express itself in this particular way. And I mean, like I said, I went to art school. That was my, undergraduate degree was in art, but it's like I really was painting the way I was painting, before that, and I'm not painting any differently. So it's just a natural way to do it. And you probably feel the same.
Yeah. It's, and I think if I was trying to force myself to do it, to create a body of work to sell it, it will become something completely different, because you tend then to feel like you need to create for a market, and that just would spoil the fun of it for me, because I just love the fact that it's purely intuitive. And like you said, it's like a meditation. I really go into that whole zone when I'm painting.
Yeah.
Time dissolves and I'm just in it, and it is doing its thing,
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that I had actually done only drawing up until about 2006. And at that point, a friend said, you never use color, you just draw. And I said, well, that I don't know how. And so I actually went and took a community college course with what turned out a wonderful woman. And I learned how to, what actually the paint is, And then she just said, go do your thing now that you know it. But it was interesting. I actually had to learn how to use the paints at that point because I didn't remember what I'd learned in college, and I'd never actually used liquid acrylics before. So,
yeah, those are fun to use, actually. I love you.
Yeah.
Acrylics, really fun. It's great to have both those kinds of gifts or skills, to be able to write and to create artwork. It's very therapeutic as well, I would say, right? Well, for me it is. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to look at more as like, is breathing therapeutic? I guess is eating therapeutic. I mean, um, yeah, I don't know if I look at it as therapeutic. I just really more look at it as it's natural. And I think that's why it was so challenging to have this kind of external authority telling me, this message that it wasn't, not that it wasn't natural, but that it wasn't the highest way to be. Um,
Hmm.
I think that was the essence of that. So I've
Yeah.
come to the feeling that what's natural is, in a sense, the highest way to be, right?
Yes, yes, I'm with you absolutely.
Yeah,
Because if you are receiving a prompt, an insight, and intuition, or whatever you want to call it, to create, and it's flowing through you, then the energy of that from source itself has the capacity to be able to uplift, inspire, motivate, awaken, whatever you want to call it, anyone who's reading or viewing what you've created. And to me, that is the whole point and purpose of being alive and connecting in with oneself and
right,
listening and responding from the inside out. And
right.
it's the most beautiful thing, especially if you have the courage to stand behind it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and I think, I mean, that's a general statement, and that is covers, like, all books, all all the books I've worked on, all the different paintings and whatnot. Specifically, the one coming back to the die, though, um, the message and the teaching in the Mahabharata, I think that was calling to me, really had not was that, but it was also, how do we as humans live in the world in a way that's not separating spiritual and the world? Because that is the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of the Mahabharata, gives that as the central teaching of how to become, how to live in the world, and to not separate enlightenment in the world from living in the world. And so I think the messages can also be really specific in that kind of way, that, yeah,
yes.
that connect with the world as well.
Yes, 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 and yes, it includes the world, and it includes challenges and negative emotions that come up, and all the gnarly things that we would rather not have to deal with. But it really welcomes and accepts everything.
Mhm.
Your humanity and all of those things is a part of that whole process of recognition, self-recognition, right?
Yes, that, and I would add how to live with right action in the world. And that's not just an individual thing, because
Yeah,
we're a collective of humanity. So even if I'm over here doing it in my little office by myself, or my studio by myself, there's a responsibility and duty, or if you want to call it that, in with a small d, duty or something, to act in the world in a way that's beneficial for the world, which actually gets back to service, because
yes,
it is about, ironically, it
yeah,
actually is about service then.
yes, yes, yeah. So it's kind of a personal call to action to serve the whole. And what happens is when you serve the whole, you kind of feed, inspire, and serve yourself, right? With a capital S, as well as a small s. So
Yeah,
no,
yeah. And,
yeah,
and you don't make the, and you don't, and you stop making the dualities between those
yes,
things.
yes.
So it's
That
no
kind,
longer, well, I do this or I do this, or,
yes,
or it's them or me, or, it becomes a non-dual thing.
yes, yes. All of that kind of division collapses in on itself somehow, or falls away, or whatever you want, whatever, however you want to describe that. But
Yeah.
the big thing is having the courage to step into that place of sharing what you feel called to share, and not diminishing yourself or
Yeah.
hiding away, or whatever the story is, that we're all
Saying
familiar
that
with.
what I'm doing, it for me, it was saying that what I'm doing is lesser than what I could or should be doing. I should be
Mm-hmm.
doing something that is greater than this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
And I've walked away from feeling that, I think.
Yeah. Which is fantastic. which is why you're here doing what you're doing now, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we'll see what's next.
Yes, what
Yeah.
a gift. Fantastic. All right, so I think maybe we're kind of coming to the end of our time together today. But before we go, I would love you to just remind people where they can find you. And
And this
oh
is
yeah,
that I have the advanced copy of, which is coming out in April 2nd, 6 weeks or something away at this point, or less by the time
yeah,
someone's listening to this. The places to find me are I have a website, which is my name, judeberman.com. Actually, haven't the art blog that you were talking about is judeberman.org. So all you need is my name and com and org, but
yes.
one or the other. And the book is basically available for purchase or for pre-order, and purchase after that date, any place that you buy books. So Amazon, but also Bookshop which is for indie bookstores and stuff, Barnes and Nobles, all the rest of those kinds of places.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Jude, thank you so much for joining me today on Talking True. This has been really wonderful, and I'm sure what you've shared will resonate with a lot of people. So
My
thank you.
pleasure too.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us when this goes live or seeing the recording later. I really appreciate it. If you feel that this episode has value and you want to share, please feel free to share with friends and family members. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. That would be really great. So that's all from us for today and for now. So take it easy, be well, and bye for now.